welcome to a special Halloween-ish episode of the Filmumentaries podcast. This is Jamie Benning talking to you here from my cottage deep in the English countryside. The weather outside is best described as grim, but the fire is crackling away, and the scene is set to talk to two gentlemen about some ghost stories. Before that, I just wanted to welcome any new listeners for joining. If you love film history, you're very welcome here. Thanks also to any returning listeners, but particularly to those who continue to support the podcast. To make it financially viable, I'm still looking for about another 40 or so of you to support the podcast via patreon.com/Jamie Benning. Just $12 will pay for an entire year of episodes. That's 24 episodes, but more than likely there'll be more because I do occasionally include bonus episodes like this one. Okay, so if you listened to episode 87, you'll have heard my conversation with the British Film Institute's Douglas Weir. He's technical and remastering lead there and does great work with his team to restore and release films from British classics to lost gems. And he invited me back to talk to him and his colleague, Vic Pratt, film historian and video publishing producer. So I got together with them both at BFI Southbank last week to talk about some of their new projects. One of their Blu-ray releases out this month is Short Sharp Shocks, Volume 3, a wonderful collection of short films which, well, I won't say any more just now. You'll hear everything about it in our conversation. Just grab a glass of brandy, get a blanket, pull your chair closer to the fireplace, and I'll be back at the end for a bit more jabbering on. All right, so guys, tell me about these projects that you've got that are coming out in time for Halloween. Where did they begin and what are they all about?
Well, one of our sort of most popular series in the Flipside range is a series called Short Sharp Shocks, which we're currently up to the third volume of this. And these are a kind of a collection of films that have an eerie or sort of spooky theme generally, or something strange and unusual about them. Eccentric films, British films, short subjects usually, stuff that used to be part of what they called the supporting programme at cinemas. Mm-hmm. And we're just we've just released the third in the series, Short Sharp Shocks Volume 3.
But this is the 47th Flipside.
It is the 47th Flipside.
Yes, and tell me about Flipside. Where did that begin?
The Flipside series, back in the dawn of time, there used to be a cinema strand down here at BFI Southbank where we're speaking today, that I co-created with a friend of mine, William Fowler. It was called the Flipside, and it was just a kind of chance to screen things that perhaps had fallen off the critical radar or were kind of undervalued by film historians, or perhaps didn't quite fit the conventional notions of sort of the British cinematic canon. And that sort of, we started this off as a series of film screenings, which would have been around 2006, 2007.
I remember.
Do you remember?
One of the first ones before we even knew each other. And I thought, look at that guy, he's famous, it was you. And it was Deathline?
Deathline, yeah, which was very much a Flipside kind of film, which is, as all your listeners will know, is about sort of cannibalistic, sort of subhumans living in an underground.
Minotaurs.
Great sort of 70s.
Amazing.
Shocker, very strange. So yeah, the whole sort of premise of the Flipside idea was that it would be things that people might not have seen before, or they might sort of half remember, or things that we wanted to introduce people to. And we also were quite keen to make it so it didn't have to be like some sort of highfalutin sort of critically acclaimed masterpiece to fit into the series. It could be things that, well, what they used to call a curate's egg, where some bits were better than others. It could be stuff that was slightly salacious, sleazy, sort of stuff that perhaps in the olden days the BFI might not have been that inclined to champion, perhaps. And so there came a sort of moment when we've been doing this for a few years where a couple of very good friends and colleagues of ours, Jane Giles and Sam Dunn in the Blu-ray DVD team.
So Sam used to
run it, and they sort of got together with us, and we decided we'd do a sort of series of discs and releases to sort of fit in with this.
Yeah.
And it was quite a sort of a new and unconventional thing for the BFI to be doing on its home entertainment label. And these are all specifically branded as Flipside and numbered to create a real sort of collector's series, because I love physical objects. I got records and comic books and books and lots and lots of DVDs and Blu-rays, and so I love things that have numbers on them. And we all decided this would be great, so you'd sort of want to fill in all the gaps in your series. And so we started that off with first three, Bed Sitting Room, Richard Lester film, and also Primitive London and London in the Raw, which are like I guess the first films we ever showed in Flipside at the cinema. Me and William was Primitive London, and so that was fitting that this sort of London set, 60s swinging London Mondo film would be one of the earliest.
They're like, to me, definitive Flipside films, really. I mean, I think every Flipside release is a definitive Flipside, but those earlier ones really, I was thinking about Man of Violence the other day.
Oh, yeah.
And
which is a Pete Walker film.
Yeah, and Permissive, which is a really greasy sort of end of the hippie era. Would you say end of the hippie? 1971?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these releases sort of tend to be from that sort of grim, austere cinematic decade when sort of British cinema was in a total slump.
Yeah.
And
it was just sort of sex films and James Bond films.
Yeah, and on the buses and Confessions of a Window Cleaner sort of propping up the British cinema industry, taking lots of money.
And masterpieces.
Well, some people would say they are. I certainly have friends who would say they are.
And where'd you go about finding these? Like, what's your first port of call to dig these out? I mean, is there a list in the archives somewhere of these films that kind of fit into that category, or because you're curating this yourself?
I think the thing about the BFI in the past certainly was that it was sort of, if there were any lists, these would have been the lists of films to avoid. These were the films that were sort of slightly frowned upon, the ones that weren't made by proper filmmakers. So it was all about the fact that there wasn't a list. We were kind of trying to assemble an alternative sort of canon of British cinema in a lot of ways, and television as well, because there's loads of TV that fits into the Flipside idea. So we weren't trying to be specifically just cinema. We wanted cinema and TV, but it was all about stuff that wouldn't be in lists, wouldn't be in greatest film lists, wouldn't be the kind of thing you would expect the BFI necessarily to be acclaiming.
I bet a lot of this, though, would have inspired the British filmmakers of today, and you're doing a real service for those people as well to bring these back to the fore and remind them of what inspired them.
We've definitely got some big filmmaker fans who write in and say, you should do this, you should do that.
Yeah, Edgar Wright's a big fan.
Edgar Wright's a big fan.
And Nicholas Winding Refn's a big fan.
Nicholas Winding Refn helped us out on a few of them.
Yeah, very.
Because he's a big film collector. So he came in with his own materials and some very, very... There was the little case history. There was one film that we did. We did a couple of films by a filmmaker called Andy Milligan, who I am absolutely fascinated by. Andy Milligan. His films are awful. Not most of them are.
Well, some people would say they're masterpieces.
Some people would say they're masterpieces, but I think the man himself and his technique and the whole history of it is fascinating. But essentially, these films went missing, because they were shot on reversal film, which meant it wasn't a negative, and they were the reversal film from the camera was cut, and in a lot of situations that was also projected, because he was making them originally for little cinema clubs.
He was an American guy.
It's America. But these films, so they went missing. But he came to the UK in the 60s,
late 60s, early 70s.
And he made a few films over here. One of them's called The Body Beneath, and the other one was called
Nightbirds.
Nightbirds. And we managed to find a 35mm print of Nightbirds. It belonged to Nicholas Winding Refn, and had sections missing from it. And doing my technical bit, I realised that the bits missing from it were actually the trailer. So they'd used the only film print they probably had at the time to make the trailer. So it's like, talk about cutting a nova split your face. But then I did some more research, and we found that the original camera reversal, so they've been the Ektachrome,
16 mil.
16 mil magnetic audio, which is very unusual. That's what they used on newsreels. So it was direct audio through the camera. Found it in the collection of Mike Verini, Something Weird Video. But that was a real bit of digging about. So I think with the flip sides, because of the way they are, the nature of them, like Vic was saying, that technically also poses a challenge, because quite often there's literally one film element, like Vic.
Yeah.
So I've got a 16mm print from so-and-so's loft,
Yeah.
I was going to ask that. I mean, do these things appear in collections and archives, or do you sometimes find them in somebody's bedside drawer kind of thing?
It's a bit of both.
Yeah.
But more often than not, they're not in national archives.
No, these are very much the kind of things that haven't been archived, there haven't been loads of prints made. I mean, I guess one of the most acute cases of that is the work we did on The Appointment.
The Appointment, yeah, which I think I gave you a copy of before.
Terrific film by a guy called Lindsay Vickers, an amazing, spooky, sort of psychically flavoured, ghosty sort of story, which deals with, it's got Edward Woodward in it, who everyone will know, the Wicker Man, and he plays a sort of an uptight father who doesn't go to his daughter's violin concert, but she has sort of some kind of strange power which starts to sort of suggest that he might regret not going to a violin concert. And it's quite an astonishing and brilliant film, and it's the only film that Lindsay ever made, because he sort of retreated from the business afterwards because he had such a tough time making it. And it would appear that only one print was ever made of this film, one or two, and they're both lost, and the negative is lost. And so it was always our goal when we started off doing the Flipside label that we would do The Appointment, but there was just nothing we could use to master it, because all there were sort of a few. It got a brief release on VHS and Betamax.
Yeah, at one point,
Just hopes.
We were going to compile the film from the best ex-rental and unopened sealed VHSs from the 80s, and they looked awful. I held out. I was like, I don't know about this. And then eventually, I'd gone through every archive and every possible contact. Even like Japan, everywhere, nothing. And then, for whatever reason, I returned to the Sony Columbia archive looking for something else, and I asked Rita there, who's great. I thought I'll ask again, and then she did turn up a 1-inch tape, an NTSC 1-inch broadcast tape. And a lot of the time, people had said, "Oh yeah, we've got something," and it was that Omar Sharif film.
Yeah, there's another.
Yeah, and I thought it's a studio vault. It'll be the Omar Sharif film, but it wasn't. It was the film. I couldn't believe it. Do you remember? And then she said, "You can use it because we've got no rights in this anymore." And that's what we ended up releasing. But that's a great example of the importance of the flip side. And sometimes these films aren't in national archives like your Libraries of Congress, I think, because maybe those archives overlooked them as well as being not worthy of.
But we should also note that your colleague Peter Stanley did an amazing.
Peter, yeah. So
amazing
Peter, who works with me and my team, is the whiz, and he
went through that pretty much shot by shot, sort of making it look as good as it possibly could, given that it was from an old videotape.
Doing travelling mats and rotoscoping and all sorts of painting out. Yeah, because it was video. It's a whole different world of film preservation and restoration than film. Very different.
So often the materials are very compromised.
Yeah.
And you have to spend a long time finding the materials, and then there's also a lot of chasing around to locate where the rights in these films are too. Yeah. So that can be
just as lost as the film prints themselves.
I think when we did Tam Lin, the Ballad of Tam Lin, which is a sort of Roddy McDowall film with Ava Gardner, we only eventually came to be able to do it after a long and torturous route of sort of checking where various sort of collapsed companies had sort of gone on, and where the catalogues, because all these catalogues, sometimes tiny little companies go bust after one or two films, and then it's sold to another collection, and then that collection, that catalogue goes bust and it's sold to another, and
it's a paper trail.
It is a paper trail. You have to follow paper trails. So that is the other.
Actual paper.
Yeah, actual paper. It's not been scanned or digitised. It's all on off-site storage.
Takes a long time. I mean, I can't mention the title of it at the minute, but there's a film that I've had in my possession. I actually bought the film Elements, and it's one of only 2 prints in the world of this film, and 2 film elements, 2 prints are the only film elements, and I bought it off eBay for 50 quid. And it's quite astounding. I can't tell you what it is, but it's quite astounding considering what it is. I bought it off eBay for 50 quid because there was a misspelling on the listing. It's a Scottish film, and so I know the director. I'm friends with the director. He's in his 80s, and we are basically. He said, "Oh, I gave the rights to the star of the film." So we got in touch with the star of the film, who's a pretty catastrophically, an unbelievably huge Scottish figure, and he said, "Oh, I can't remember that. So I don't have any proof of that. Sorry." And we're like, "Oh, so the rights were just suddenly nowhere." The original distributor had crumbled and disappeared a long time ago, like Vic was saying. So we've been, for the last 3 years, we've been going through a digging process of digging up original bits of paperwork, proof that the director, who's also the producer, can claim rights, and it just takes a lot of time. Meanwhile, the film print sits under my desk.
Sure.
It's fine. We've scanned it, but it's just sitting there. We've even done artwork and everything for the release. It's all sitting ready to go. Yeah. But we can't do anything until literally every box is taken because of rights.
It's the long game, isn't it? Because I mean, I know
we're getting close.
I mean, there are films that we've been putting on the Short Sharp Shocks sets that you sort of, sometime around 1998, I wrote it down in a book that would be quite good to do, and then sort of maybe we showed it around 2005, and then sort of another 10 or 15 years later, you're eventually getting around to putting it on a disc. Skin Flicker on the new.
Yeah, Skin Flicker's been floating around for years. We've had the masters for a long time.
It's a very harrowing film about sort of political dissidents kidnapping a government minister, so sort of torturing him.
We should say that it's on the new Sharp Sharp Shocks. It is on the new 3.
Short Sharp Shocks. I think it's probably the most disturbing film on the set, but it's a brilliantly made film, brilliantly scripted film with Henry Wolff in it, who I remember being in kids' shows and Rutland Week in Television in the 70s, playing this sort of quite fierce terrorist, very threatening performance, a great performance. Tony Becat film.
1973.
And I mean, we wanted to do this for ages, and me and William wrote about it in our book, which is called The Bodies Beneath, the flip side of British film and television. And we put a chapter about it in there, and now that was like sort of 5 or 6 years ago. Yeah. And we were just waiting.
I remember like over 10 years ago, we talked about Sam, who is a big important figure in the whole flip
absolutely
side. But Sam, and we were chatting about it, and we had the master materials. It was all there, and we were talking about it over 10 years ago. It's just been sitting there for a long time. We've got an Orson Welles film on here as well. I'm just looking at the back of the disc here. I forgot about that.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about how we're not going into the conventional canon, but on this occasion we are, right?
But he turned Orson Welles.
Orson Welles.
He's in it as an actor, though, right?
Yeah, that's right.
But he's doing it as a favour.
Yeah. He was making Othello around that time, and there was a sort of halt in production while they were waiting for more money. And so he went and, as a favour, appeared in a film called Return to Glenaskall, which is a little sort of Irish, spooky, short story type tale.
Academy Award nominated.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it was. It's really good, really lovely, spooky little film with a sort of eerie harp soundtrack.
I particularly enjoy the shots of him driving when quite clearly the car's stationary and someone's just rocking it.
Yeah,
that's what kind of makes it.
But they have these little jokes in it, like he picks up this hitchhiker and he says, I've got trouble with my distributor, talking about his car, and Orson Welles says, I have trouble with my distributor. So, classic little Orson Welles one-liners going on in it. But yeah, really brilliant film. So, yes, I think one of the things, another factor about the flip side is we like to, where we can, collide stuff that might feature in the canon with stuff that never ever would. So we like to draw these sort of connections across the circuit board of cinema, maybe, that you might not actually make, so we can have Orson Welles in there along with
some good sci-fi. I'm just sorry, because I only work on the technical side of things. I don't actually see the copy, even though you do send it to me.
Yeah, he never reads it.
I never read it.
No, I never looked at it.
Can't actually read.
No.
It's called The Terminal Game, 1982. A computer programmer investigates a colleague's suspicious death in this long-lost, ominously prescient tale of the pearls of big corporations and new technology.
I think, this is
That's pretty groovy.
It's a very groovy film, and it was a very lost film as well. This is another one that was recovered.
16mm print, isn't
16mm print that was bought on eBay again. Yeah. And even the director didn't have a copy. So,
but then you've got Wings of Death, which is from the original Neg, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. Well, The Wings of Death, which is by Nicola Bruce and Michael Coulson,
1985,
is an actual BFI film. So back when we were
the BFI, just to give a very quick 1-2 sentence history, used to have. It does the film fund now, but it's a very different thing. The BFI Film Fund. We used to have the BFI Production Board, which funded the making of feature films and then also the short films. Before that, there was the BFI Experimental Film Fund, which is similar but slightly different. But we have the rights to all those films and shorts, and generally we have the original materials to all of them as well. So it's a great library to dig into. And Wings of Death. Wings
of Death is originally screened with Nightmare on Elm Street as the supporting subject.
So it's a short film, isn't it? So
yes, it again? It's about 20 minutes. It's about a sort of young junkie who sort of checks into this bizarre hotel where kind of weird stuff happens to him. And it stars Dexter Fletcher giving a very early and very good performance. Yeah. And apparently this was the film, the directors told me, where when Derek Jarman saw this film, he said, I must have him for Caravaggio. So it was directly after this that he was signed for Caravaggio. And it's a real terrific...
it's quite disturbing visuals, you know?
Yeah, incredibly sort of painterly, poetic sort of mixture of images and sounds.
It's quite disturbing. It's about drug addiction and, it's quite... I mean...
You shot around London.
You can see why they paired it with Elm Street, because a lot of it's like an Elm Street dream, but without Freddy Krueger, you know?
I wish they would bring back short films before main features.
Yeah, it was great, wasn't it? I mean, now you just get a load of crummy adverts for cars and watches.
Yeah, I saw Mean Streets the other afternoon, on Monday afternoon, the new 4K restoration. And I went along because it was the afternoon. I thought I'll go along, watch it, and then I'll get back to work. I wasn't skiving, but there was half an hour of adverts. There was 2 trailers, but half an hour of car adverts. And it's like, gee, I could have,
I look at the start time and add 25 minutes and arrive then.
Well, I thought it'd be different. I thought it'd been different at 1 o'clock on a Monday afternoon, but it wasn't. So
strange, isn't it? Yeah. Talking about the short, sharp shocks here, there's something about kind of spooky, ghosty stories that's very sort of primordial, isn't there? There's sitting around the campfire, sort of telling stories, and the black unknown beyond the flame of the fire. There's something super creepy for me about those ghost stories, more so than horror movies.
Yeah, I think
there's a real British tradition, which is different to, say, the American tradition of the campfire. In Britain, it's more like the fireplace.
Yeah, maybe with a sort of a glass of brandy, sort of brandy snifter, and sort of the crackling of the logs there. Yeah, and I think that is one of the ideas we celebrate through this, and I guess through the Ghost Stories for Christmas as well, right?
I thought we got the Ghost Stories for Christmas. So the Sharp Shocks, you can buy that now, but Ghost Stories for Christmas, unbelievably, I can't remember. I never remember release dates, but it'll be out in time for Christmas.
Let's hope so.
Let's hope so.
Yeah.
It is. It's done. But they got the BBC Ghost Stories, the M.R. James, and Charles Dickens. In fact, I only learned recently, the BBC Ghost Stories, they're not all M.R. James.
No,
I thought there's like 2 or 3 that aren't. One of them's...
Well, the Signalman is Dickens.
The Signalman's Dickens, and then there's, I think, Stigma's not, is it? And
the Ice House is John Bowen.
That's right, that's it.
I love John Bowen. I think he's one of the greatest writers of spooky stories. We've done some of his stuff on Play for Today collections in the past. We did a photograph. And long ago, one of the first films that we showed in Flipside was a TV film called Robin Redbreast.
Yeah.
Which is...
folk horror.
That's what they call it now, folk horror. I mean, when we were showing that back in the sort of early 2000s, there was no such term. So we called it the sinister folk. It was the kind of blanket term we kind of devised for it then. But since then, I mean, various people have put their flags in the sand to decide that they've invented folk horror. But
I was actually just reading the other day or yesterday, people love putting the term folk in front of spooky British things.
Yeah.
There's a book that I was thinking of buying, and it's about walking around Britain around, stone circles and things, and folks in the title.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, what's folk got to do with that? But it's becoming a bit of a catch-all term, which is not.
It is. I mean, it's sort of like, but yeah, I think there's something specifically spooky and fireside about those ghost stories.
Yeah, and I'm talking about the book about walking around stone circles. That's a very British thing, and the ghost stories and the sharp shocks are rooted in that sort of tradition of maybe I don't want to. I'm trying not to say folk horror.
Well,
what was it you called it?
I call it the sinister folk.
The sinister folk. The sinister people.
But that doesn't make anything either.
That sounds like sinister people.
Yeah, I know. The whole thing of trying to create blanket terms and fit everything into it.
I think it's a very British thing, because I guess they don't have that sort of storytelling anywhere else like we do in the UK, and the M.R. James films fit perfectly into that. And well, this is volume 2 that we've done, and this is I don't know if this is the last one, but it's definitely it's the last of the classic canon of the ghost stories. Some of the newer ones are on there as well.
Yeah.
Some of them are very good.
From
the Hills, very good.
Yeah, they're a lot better than I thought I remembered them being,
but
actually.
They all have a certain very British ghost story theme going through them, in that they're quite austere. They're all about sort of men. They're very sort of male.
They're quite bookish, aren't they? It's also about academics researching in archives. There's
one or two of them that they travel into the rural countryside and they stay in a guest house. It's just full of other academic men.
Yeah,
they're all studying. Excellent breakfast.
Yeah. Breakfasts. I was checking some of the films on some of the programs on one of the discs the other day. I was noticing how every single one of them has sort of scenes of sort of fusty old men sitting down to breakfast. It seems to be a recurrent trope through the whole series.
Well, my favourite one's The Signalman, which is basically about a haunted tunnel, I guess. And it's
brilliant.
It's Denham Elliott, and I forget the name of the other actor, but it's basically about a man who's on holiday, a walking holiday on his own, in like the winter. It's always in winter, and he stumbles across Denham Elliott, who's sitting in his signal box on his own, because it's early 1900s. And he decides to spend his holiday just hanging out in a signal box with Denham Elliott.
I mean, they're shamelessly old school.
Oh yeah.
What time period are we talking about here for these stories? But the actual broadcast.
The broadcast 70s, into the 80s, really. I suppose towards the 80s.
So much of this sort of style of film is linked to sort of imagination and dreams, and that feeling of that sort of empty feeling when you're alone and you can.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I bet if I watch these back, I'll have memories of seeing snippets of them on TV late at night when I shouldn't have been watching TV.
Right.
Well, I thought you were going to say something else. What I was going to say was, quite often the threat in the films, the paranormal threat, like A Warning to the Curious, which is another brilliant one about the Crowns of Norfolk, about horrifying folk. Is that right? Sinister folk.
But you can call it folk horror, it's fine.
Folk horror. But it's based on the legend of the fact that England was protected from invasion because the crowns of England were buried along the Norfolk coast. And this academic character finds one of them, and then he's haunted by this sinister figure. And I always think that in these films, a lot of the terror is actually inside the person's head. It's the dread. It's about someone's psyche.
Yeah, you could just say they're all about the sort of that internal horror of your own psyche.
Repression.
Yeah, well,
there's a lot of repression.
But yeah, I mean, you don't even necessarily have to consider the ghost to be supernatural. The ghost could be just the ghosts of your own wheels sort of turning around in your mind. That's
Well, I think they're all only half an hour, which is perfect. And From a technical standpoint, they're beautiful because they're BBC films, and whenever we work with the BBC, I used to work at the BBC Archive years ago, because of the nature of the way they were produced. So the BBC was, BBC was still filming dramas on 16mm up until about 10 years ago. Fully, my sort of really bad fact is Monarch of the Glen was shot in 16mm up until they cancelled it. Yeah, but because they're shot in 16mm, the original negatives are in excellent condition because they weren't distributed in cinemas. So to take the Ghost Stories as an example,
they all film.
All film. Well,
nothing on video.
The Ghost Stories are all film up until the new ones from the last 10, 15 years. I think the new ones are shot on video. Some of them standard definition. But the 70s ones are all film. There's none of that cutting to an internal studio on the Ghost Stories, which some of the Play for Today's did. But on the Ghost Stories, you've got a complete 16mm negative, or to be more precise, an AB negative. And that would have been printed once to an interpositive, and then to a dupe negative, and then a print, and then they would have telecented the print. They'd have made a tape, and that tape, until recently, would have been the copy that you would have seen on TV. That's why they look a bit ropey. We're going to try, I was chatting to the head of the archive recently, and hopefully we're going to be repatriating our 2K restorations into the BBC archive, so they'll be on TV. But so because there's only one run on the film elements, there are BBC elements, especially the negatives, are in excellent condition, and they're beautiful 16mm. So they look really great, and people who already have Volume 1 will know that. So anytime we get a chance to work with BBC materials, it's always, it's enjoyable. I find it enjoyable. From a technical nerd standpoint, it's enjoyable.
Well, I'm just remembering the time and work you put into doing 1984.
Oh gosh, yeah, 1984, which I think we chatted about in the last podcast because that is your classic case of where there's film mixed in with video, right? And all that existed was a 16mm print, which included the video elements printed back to 16mm on what's called a tele-recording. So a little potted history is that the BBC shot 35mm black and white until the late 50s. When Richard Attenborough was going off to do Zoo Quest, he convinced them to let them shoot 16mm because it was smaller, lighter, and cheaper, which actually they shot in colour, and they rediscovered the colour print about 10 years ago.
Is that Richard or David?
Sorry, David Attenborough. I get them mixed up.
Yeah.
Dickie Attenborough. David Attenborough. David Attenborough, correct. He convinced them to shoot 16mm. They actually shot colour, and they rediscovered those colour prints about 10 years ago, and Zoo Quest was put out for the first time in colour. It was amazing. So the BBC moved to 16mm, and they were the first broadcaster to do that in the late 50s, and everything from then forward, unless it was prestigious, was shot 16mm. If it was a mixture of video or entirely video, what they used to do was they create a thing called a tele-recording, which was a very, very early method of printing video back out to film. If you watch early episodes of Doctor Who or Top of the Pops, or you get that aliasing, which is basically because they're filming a CRT monitor,
and it's also from a 405 line monitor, isn't it?
Because of
the 525.
Exactly, and because it was shot on video, the BBC were infamous for deleting videotape, and then they'd send out the tele-recordings to other territories,
16mm,
like Africa,
Australia, isn't it?
Yeah, and then those would be the only copies of these films. So 1984 was a good example of that. But 1984 was shot on both video and film. So every time they went outside into location, it was shot in 30. It was in the era of when they were still shooting 35mm, and they still had the 35mm negative for those shots, but they had none of the video materials. So we had to work from.
When you say we, it was you pretty much, wasn't it? You went through each shot.
Well, it was me and a few others. I don't want to take credit. I've got Peter and a team of other people. But so you have this disparity between beautiful 35mm and then compromised 16mm tele-recording. But it's literally all that exists for the film. We did a lot on that, and I think I was never fully satisfied with the outcome of that. We could have gone in various different directions, but it's one of these things, it's one of these projects where you just have to stop and let it go, because it will never be perfect.
Well, I think it also kind of, in all these things like the Short Sharp Shocks and like The Appointment, and in the case of 1984, you can never please everybody. However you do it, you have to compromise on one thing to do it a certain way that's going to please somebody else, and so there will always be.
I mean, there's a puritanical view of 1984 that you should just telecine a print and show that.
So I guess you have to make choices and try it, and I mean, my thing is that you should reflect the original experience as much as you possibly can.
That's where Vic and I will a lot of the time sit down with a cup of tea and discuss how we're going to present this. And I'll say, well, I think we should do this, and what do you think of that? And we'll sort of bandy it about.
Just to try and get an authentic experience.
Yeah,
right?
You don't want to, I mean, as I always say, you're trying to present these things as the director achieved, not as they intended.
Which is why I'm sometimes, I mean, I know when we were, a long time ago, we were doing a film, I think it was called Song of Paris, which was an Adelphi early 50s comedy, and there was a hair in the gate on the original neg, and there was a big question of, do we take out that hair? But we didn't take out the hair, because when they went to see it, they would have seen the hair. So, I mean, now you can take out the hair, then you couldn't take out the hair. So,
yeah, I remember on a short film years ago, we were transferring it, and it was one of my colleagues was doing it, and for whatever reason, I was in the suite, the audio suite, and there were all these people around a computer, and it was one of the labs in Soho, and there was this noise up. And they're like, what's this? Because sometimes you can get that noise if the optical track drifts into the perforations, the sprocket holes, and they were trying to work it out. Now, I shoot 16mm, and I've got 16mm cameras, and instantly I went, that's the sound of the camera. They haven't blimped it, the audio, because it's a cheap, I think it was a production board film. And they were like, okay, so how can what have we got filters here? This was at Deluxe, so they have all the technology. So, okay, we can remove this. And I said, no, we shouldn't remove it, because that would be on the print. Now, we could have actually removed that and made it sound brilliant, but we didn't. We left it in. So there is a, you know, you do sometimes have to sort of control yourself and say, right,
and
I'm pretty good at that, because I think the least you do to these things, the better anyway. The more you do, there's a lot of film restorations and remastering that goes out now, and, you know, big Hollywood films, and you think, wow, they've done too much there.
They've squashed all the life out of it.
They've squashed the life of it. Or you can see exactly what's going on. I saw some big Hollywood films recently in the IMAX and in like, you know, the you know, Picture House, wherever, and, you know, these are big films. You know, I guess it's the sort of byproduct of doing this work is you'll see from shot to shot that they've done different things, and you think, why have they done this? You know, we shouldn't have done that.
But then with your you know, love of Lucasfilm, you'll be more than well aware how when the director is still alive, there's a whole other layer of complexity, because if the director wants to come back to the work and start changing it, then that's
sometimes you can't stop them.
That's another factor. So there are all kinds of questions.
We have been in suites or in preview theatres with directors. I know I have, and I'm pretty sure you have as well, Vic, maybe together, where the director's gone, great, can I move this here?
Yeah.
And at the moment, actually, on the Scottish film I was talking about, the director wants to move a shot to before the credits, because he said, oh, that's always how I intended it. And I'm saying, no, you can't do that. And usually we kind of get them, but I guess sometimes if there's a lot of power involved and maybe a lot of money, you have to make two versions, and sometimes you see that, especially on Blu-ray and UHD, there'll be two versions of a film. I think in the last podcast we talked about Blade Runner. Now, that's not Ridley Scott's fault. He just wanted to finish the film the way he wanted it. That's actually a bad example. It's a different example. But the you do sometimes get versions of films where there's been added effects, and then you also get the option to watch it the original way,
which I think is important. We talked about Jaws last time when they had the Film on Film Festival. About, you know, watching that film with the original colour timing and the mono mix and all of that stuff. And there is something about that I sort of described it as time travel, because if you over restore something, you're removing the sort of atmospherics, aren't you, of that era that it was made in. So in that print you could see, oh, that's clearly a different day. You know, as somebody who's watched it so many different.
And our timing wasn't perfect, because it would have been done manually. It would have done photochemically on a machine. And I think one thing I mentioned that I need to correct actually on that podcast was that you can actually hear them. The mono sound is on the new UHD disc, but I think a friend of mine was at that screening, Stuart, and he's like, you know, a big sound guy. He's worked with Altman and all these people, and he said, I mean, I think I said this before, one of the big takeaways for me was that beautiful mono sound, but it was a slight distortion on it because it was an optical track. So even then, the mono audio, which is the original mono audio on the latest UHD release, is amazing. It will be perfect. Whereas that print still had, what would you call it, those imperfections that give it that realness. I mean, your brain never sees the same film ever. No. So you could watch Jaws 1,000,000 times, but your brain's seeing it differently because what you think you're seeing is to do with memory. But when you see it on a print, you're actually just physically, your brain's a very logical thing. What it's seeing is thinking, oh, this is a different thing. But you're recognizing, your memory's recognizing what you're looking at, but your brain's processing it in different ways. So that's when you see a 35mm print. Quite often, a lot of people say, oh, it's like seeing it for I've never, it was an amazing experience, and they can't work out why. It's because it's a mental thing, it's a brain thing.
And I also think imperfection is where it's at.
Oh, absolutely. And, it gives it the realness.
There's a Leonard Cohen song where he sings, cracks, that's where the light gets in. And I think that's totally, that's what it's all about.
Absolutely, and that feeds into, like, the other guys you've interviewed from ILM, talking about practical effects versus CGI. We've got some colleagues that sometimes work with ILM, and they do effects editing. And they'll talk about pixel management, managing every single shot down to the pixel to make it perfect. And I was at the cinema the other day and I saw 2 new superhero trailers, and I just turned around to my friend and went, what? I don't know what's going on. Everything is so perfect, it's just hard to follow. Whereas back in the day with the practicalities, you may be able to see the seam and the costume, whatever, but it was more believable because, like you're saying, it gives it that slight imperfection, which is, I guess, true to it.
And also, just chucking money at stuff isn't the way either, because I know Bergman used to say you should be able to make an interesting scene out of 2 people sitting at a table and then project it on a sheet, That's another key part of the...
What is it? Your man used to say, he said, a girl and a gun. What was his name?
Oh, Goddard.
Goddard, a girl and a gun, or something like that.
Yeah.
But Bergman doubled down and just said 2 people.
2 people.
A different approach.
Yeah.
But the same. So with these releases then, is this the end of Flipside stuff? Is it to continue? Have you got stuff in the pipeline?
We've got, as like Vic said, there's a list that we'll always be trying to work out.
Yeah, we got lots of things still under Doug's desk.
Yeah,
he can hardly put his feet down.
This is actually true. I can't put my legs onto my desk, mainly because of my poster collection, but also just a crate of tapes and bits of stuff.
Yeah, and I still have...
There's a 70mm print down there.
I still have notebooks going back for years that I go through when we're... we tried that one 5 years ago, we tried that one 10 years ago, maybe we can try it again.
You've got a list of every single film you've watched.
Yeah, I do try them.
Amazing, yeah.
Well, it's important, right?
Keeps the demons at bay.
Well, I'd be very useful when they throw it in the skip after they drag out my corpse, right? But no, it's good. I think it's good to always keep a list, always keep stuff, and we have no intention of stopping while. And I'm glad to say that there's still quite a devoted following for our stuff, and just generally the
physical media is doing well.
Yeah, the rumours of the demise of physical media were greatly exaggerated.
I remember 10 years ago being told there was only a few years left.
Yeah, I remember that.
And actually, if anything, since COVID, I think it's strengthened it because it's become a bit of a vinyl thing. Yeah. And younger people are now, there's stats, the men in bowler hats and clipboards have found out that younger people are beginning to pick up on it. And also people are getting wise to streaming platforms, A, removing things, and B, compressing things.
Yes.
And also there's the extra features. We go through lists of films where there's availabilities for maybe rights and things, and we distill things down, and a lot of the time nothing may come of it. But sometimes we pick up whole collections of a certain director, and there will be films that will go onto Blu-ray box sets, but there might be some other things that will go onto our streaming platform because that's getting bigger and bigger and more popular as the day goes by. I mean, the BFI player is a goldmine in itself for things that maybe we don't have the budget or can't spend the budget to author on a Blu-ray because maybe it's not the sort of thing enough people would buy copies of, because you have to think about how many copies is this going to shift. It has to basically wipe its nose. It has to make its money back. So that's not to say the film or the content is no good, but that's where streaming really comes into its own. Is like, okay, we can actually put that there, so people who have a subscription can see things that maybe we can't just put onto one disc, Whereas
this is kind of more your sort of if you're into lovely objects, this is what these discs are all about. You know, because and we all try and do them the best we possibly can within the limited resources we have. You know, so and as someone who never gave away his records or never threw out his VHS tapes, you know.
Ask his girlfriend about that.
I think you're right, though, about this whole thing about streaming, you know, and people wanting to buy these physical objects again. There's something about that, you know, you say records, something about that discovery, isn't there? A record just flicking through in a record shop and pulling out and only sort of being able to base it based on the picture on the front and maybe some liner notes or, you know, because a gatefold, getting a better impression of who the band are. They're just taking a risk, buying something and taking a risk.
I mean, I don't want to dismiss streaming. I think streaming's definitely got a place, but
of course,
if you look on Disney Plus, they've got those extras, haven't they? But even Disney's now coming back into the Blu-ray arena, so to speak, because a lot of these studios, they were so quick to abandon it and go streaming that they're now coming back to releasing things on discs. Some of the big studios are now throwing a lot into UHD discs.
And I also would add to that one of the problems with the internet is that you've got so much of an abundance, there's no focus anymore. You know, you don't know which direction to go in, and every rabbit hole can send you down 10 other rabbit holes. So one of the reasons I love object-based media is that it's finite, it's got ends, it's got walls, you know. You get this short sharp shock set and that's all that's on there.
There's a booklet.
Yeah, and that's it. You've got enough there to dig that disc and what's on it, and that's your lot, you know. And
but to add to that also, it's still got that idea that you can watch these films and then go, well,
I'll look into.
I really liked the Jeff Lowe, the Terminal game.
Yeah.
And then I guess the internet then becomes your trip to the library.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like going to the library and getting it, so you go on the internet and find out even more.
I just think that in a world where increasingly all looking at stuff is just becoming open-ended and kind of uncurated, for want of a better word.
It's Brexit.
It kind of. It's nice to have some focus, and to be able to focus, I think, is a skill that we need to retain as a culture.
And I think there's a danger in thinking that everything is available online somewhere.
Yeah, that's just not true.
It's not the case. And I will spend half an hour going through Netflix thumbnails and then go to bed having watched nothing. But I'll spend half an hour in the BFI shop and I'll come out with a stack of discs, you know, because like you say, there's something finite there, isn't there?
Yeah.
I mean, you correct me if I'm wrong, Vic, but I don't think any of these are on this new Shocks 3, I don't think any of these you could find online anywhere.
Only when the pirates put them up.
Only when the pirate. That's
on
not
YouTube.
Happen. But yeah, so this is, you know, the only way you can see these is by buying this, and obviously it's got all the extras. We've got some new interviews on here.
Yeah, some great interviews and.
Is there commentaries? No.
No, but I've done a little sort of video essay about.
There you are.
The Proudlock brothers and their Van Dyke production. So that we haven't mentioned actually this one with John Laurie on it.
Oh yeah, the great one of my favourite Scottish actors.
Can you do an impression of him as you're a Scotsman?
No, I'm not doing that because I'm not going to demean my people.
Okay. Well, I'll do it then.
You will have to pay for performance.
You're doomed.
The old empty barn.
Oh, there you go, the old empty barn. Yeah, I knew we'd get.
We've actually got.
He's in a film called Strange Stories, which is by this very small production company called Van Dyke Productions. Also has Valentine Dial in it, who was famously the Man in Black on radio and television, a great storyteller with a very distinctive voice. And so that's like an early portmanteau. And as Douglas says, this is the first time anyone's going to have a chance to have seen that. And John Laurie's in it as a sort of strange
do you know,
Clark.
I'm dealing with, I think, 3 or 4 films right now, and John Laurie's in all of them, because there was a period of cinema where he was the Scotsman. It was him and, what's your man, the ginger fella?
The ginger fella?
He was in The Professionals. Gordon Jackson.
Gordon Jackson, yeah.
So it was Gordon Jackson and John Laurie were Scotland for a few decades. It feels like that. We've got, I've been working with The Edge of the World, and they're both Powell and Pressburger. I think.
Is John Laurie in that?
Yeah.
Edge of the World?
Yeah, he's in The Edge of the World, 1930.
No, I'm just thinking, yeah.
And I Know Where I'm Going, and also The Return to the Edge of the World, he's in that, obviously. He pops up in loads of stuff.
You know who else is in it?
He always plays.
Graham Moffat.
Oh, really?
Britain's favourite fat boy.
I didn't know that. And I heard there's a book being worked on about him.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, I'm writing a book about his life, the life of Britain's favourite fat boy.
I had no idea.
His films. Yeah, no, he is. Yeah, he's in that. He was in a few Powell and Pressburgers actually.
Yeah, well, we're doing a Powell and Pressburger season at the minute.
Yeah.
It runs for 3 months.
Really, yeah. I saw the posters out front. Yeah, I must come and watch them.
Yeah, I think it's almost the entire, every single film of theirs is showing. Plus, for the first time in a long time, restored versions of his Quota Quickie B-movies.
Yeah, I find those particularly interesting.
Yeah, so those are being shown in the cinema, and we're bringing out on Blu-ray a couple of his short operas that people might not know about.
Bluebeard's Castle.
Bluebeard's Castle. Oh no, we're not bringing out The Sorcerer's Apprentice, but it's showing in cinemas. But Bluebeard's Castle is being released on Blu-ray.
In all its different versions.
In several different. So that's actually a good example of where Blu-ray comes into its own. So I think it's an hour long or something like that. So the archive, the National Film Archive, have restored this 1960s Michael Powell opera, and it exists in 3 versions. So there's the original version, which is sung in German, and then there's a re-release version from the 70s where Powell decided to put in not subtitles, but they do take the physical manifestation of a subtitle, but it's more explaining slightly what's going on between scenes. So that was the re-release, and then there was an English dub made, and I am not the authority in this, so I can't remember why the English dub was made, but I don't think it was officially released with the English dub, but it exists. So when you watch the Blu-ray, you can watch the opera in one of 3 versions.
This is the first time that's been done, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the first time the film's been released like this, and it's possibly the first time people have even seen the film, so I think it was shown on television.
Yeah, it's one of those ones that sort of slipped through the net.
It was in sort of Powell's wilderness years where he was doing...
After he'd done Peeping Tom, so he's...
did a CFF film. He did that not military, but
The Queen's Guard.
The Queen's Guard.
Yeah, Age of Consent.
And he did couple of these short operas. Yeah. So this is, because of this big season, this is where you really get to dig down. And there's a touring program as well. It's not all just in London. It will be going around the UK. So I work on a lot of all the theatrical releases as well. So I've been working on those. That's been going on for a few years, just getting those together. Yeah.
What are your next big projects on Blu-ray then in the coming months? What will people be buying as presents coming up for Christmas?
Well, I'm just doing, it's not out before Christmas, but I'm just doing Jane Giles and Ali Cattell's new documentary about the Scala cinema called Scala, which is a terrific doc, which is very much in the flip side spirit, actually, of sort of collision montaging sort of high and low film culture in the same place, often for sort of a subversive or political intent or just for pure entertainment. But their documentary about the amazing London cinema where I sort of used to go to, all-nighter shows. I remember going, seeing lots of stuff. There's Satan's Sadists, where the film caught fire on the screen. William Castle, House on Haunted Hill, where a plastic skeleton came flying across the room.
Oh, did they do that?
Yeah, they did. Nice. It got stuck, though. Halfway. So, and very... two-lane blacktop where they put one of the reels on upside down, so last reel came on upside down.
It was before the term even existed. It was a grindhouse cinema.
It was a terrific place for outsiders, and
it was the Prince Charles before the Prince Charles did that sort of thing, and it do the 24 maybe whole weekend marathons of whole back catalogues of direct the Scala documentary. The one thing I got from it, because obviously I would have been in Scotland, because Scala, in the period they cover, I think it's the 70s through to the early 90s.
And you were just young as well.
I was just a wee bear. Yeah, I was going to the movies, but I was in Glasgow, and I wouldn't have been. Well, they probably would have let me into the Scala, but it would have probably, damaged my mind. But
in a good way.
In a good way. But the one thing that I got from that documentary is it's a great playlist of gonzo cinema. So the credits at the end list all of the clips in the film, and to anybody I'd give that list and say watch these, because that will enrich your cinema going experience. But the other one that we're working on is we're doing another British transport film collection.
Now this is one of Douglas's
trains
favourite topics.
Well, it's not trains per se.
He loves trains.
I love trains. No. But it's volume 15. It's the last volume. we think. I don't want it to be, but it is the last one.
No, I'm sure there's more.
I'm sure there's about, we'll open a vault and they'll be like, oh my God, there's another 10 years worth of train films. But these are the British Transport films made by the British Transport Film Unit, who were a government-funded unit that basically made films that promoted the British Railways. And you quite often had some very well-known editors, filmmakers, directors, cinematographers who worked in these films and went on to shoot things like Get Carter, the Midnight Cowboy, John Schlesinger did a few. And because these guys worked on them, you have some really interesting artistry, really, really beautifully made films and very, very watchable films. Then you realise it's about an intercity train, and how to travel to Scotland, you know. But they're brilliant. They're absolutely brilliant, and they're very popular. And we've got volume, I want to say 15.
It is 15. Yeah,
and we've done a couple of Blu-ray best-ofs. So maybe we'll get one more Blu-ray best-of out of it. The one area we haven't really explored is the canals.
Sure. That'd be good.
Yeah, that'd be good.
What about buses?
Done a few buses.
Yeah, done some buses.
We've done bus films.
Yeah.
But those are popular. People do ask about those. And I think they're beautiful films. Whether you like trains or not, I've showed them to people who would really dismiss them. And they go, oh, that was really... The films of Jeffrey Jones, I mean, masterpieces. You're like 10-minute masterpieces in editing, if anything.
I'm looking forward to the day when I'm in the old people's home, sort of sitting
watching Jeffrey Jones.
A constant loop of British Transport films on that screen.
That's my living room.
Oh, right.
My back chair, trains. No. But we've got that coming up. It's all I can think of at the minute. We're working on stuff all the time.
Yeah, we are.
What else have we signed off recently? Oh, the films of Lorenzo Mazzetti.
Yeah.
Which she's an Italian documentary filmmaker who was part of the free cinema movement in the late 50s. Yeah. And she was with Lindsay Anderson and that crowd. And it was a very, very short movement from... How do you explain free cinema? You're probably better at that than me.
Well... free cinema, well, I mean, Lindsay Anderson being one of the key... of a sort of short documentary movement, primarily at first.
Influenced by the new wave of the late 50s?
I'm just thinking, well, it's part of...
parallel with the French new wave. They're not films that have been unavailable. There's been box sets and they've been available, but they're not really well known. And they're just beautifully made little films. Some of them don't have any dialogue or any audio. But so we've got a collection of Lorenzo Mazzetti's films accompany a new documentary about her fascinating life. Really nicely made documentary, actually. So that's, if not out already, it's out soon. And we've also got a new collection of Ozu.
Oh yeah, that's
films coming out.
Just out now.
They're just out now. These are the Lorenzo Mazzetti films have been restored by our own National Film Archive. The Ozu films have been restored in Japan, and I think there's a silent film in there. Yeah,
there is. These are not your top high hitter sort of Ozus. These are ones that you sort of. I mean, they're great, but they're not the ones that sort of trip off the tongue.
Not Tokyo Story.
No. But very fascinating catalogue, and I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. But we're currently, I mean, I know I am from a technical standpoint looking into next year, and can't say what we're doing, but there's plenty to get on with.
Yeah, there's more to come.
Lots more to come.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my conversation there with the BFI's Vic Pratt and Doug Weir. Thank you to both gentlemen for their time, their stories and their expertise, and I'm hoping to have both Vic and Doug back on the podcast intermittently when they have some new releases on the horizon. Next up on the podcast, I have a number of guests actually to choose from. I have creature creator Tom Spina. I have the creators of the new RoboDoc, author and friend of the podcast John Walsh, talking about his new Conan book. And just next week, I'm heading up to Prop Store to record an interview with founder and CEO there, Stephen Lane, so watch this space. I'm still working on more people from kind of ILM and Skywalker Sound alumni, so that should be in the coming months as well. Please remember to subscribe, leave a review and tell your friends about the podcast. And a reminder that our book, Return of the Jedi Unauthorized Timeline, is currently on sale for £20 on Amazon or your currency equivalent until Christmas. The book catalogues the entire history of the film from its inception right up to this year, 2023, its 40th anniversary. So if you're a fan of the original trilogy, this is a must-buy. Or perhaps you have a family member that might like it. Justin Berger and I spent a year writing the book, and we'd love you to take a look. So please search for Jedi Timeline on Amazon in your region, or you can visit JediTimeline.com, and there you'll find all the details. Thanks for joining me again, and I hope you can do so for the next episode of the Filmumentaries podcast. Have a good Halloween.